This is Arise, the world's standout news channel. I am Ania Zayal-Sakwe. Welcome to Newsday. It's day 6 of the Intra-African Trade Fair in Algiers. And earlier today, there was a critical side event that took place. Africa-U.S. relations turning policy shifts into strategic opportunities. So the dialogue brought together experts, policymakers, and also business leaders to look at how evolving U.S. policies towards Africa can be translated into more trade, more investment, and more cooperation under the AFCFTA framework. Let's take a look.
Through knowledge and through negotiation. And Africa brings immense value to the table. Our critical minerals, the global green transition, our digital transformation is reshaping commerce and governance. Our carbon sinks and biodiversity safeguard climate stability for all humanity. These are not side issues, if I may say. They are central to the future of the world. And they position Africa not as a junior partner, but as an indispensable one. Let us treat this moment not as a business as usual, but as a decisive opening. Let us seize it with clarity, with purpose, and with unity. If we do this, Africa will not only keep pace with the changing world, Africa will help lead it. So how do we move forward? First, by deepening our understanding of U.S. policy framework, so we can see clearly where we align and where we must push back. Second, by sharpening our ability to negotiate, not as aid recipients, but as equal partners. And third, by reinforcing African unity, because our greatest weakness, which I've learned the time I've been in Washington, has been too often been fragmentation. Our greatest strength is solidarity. Colleagues, this is our challenge, but also our opportunity to turn global shifts into durable gains for our people. And the time is now for us to make a difference in connecting and working with the US. Yes, America first, but Africa cannot stand by the other side and just say, okay, there's America first. Africa should work very hard in solidarity to make that difference. I thank you all for listening.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Now we will be introducing our next speaker, Ms. Joanna LeBlanc. Joanna LeBlanc is a distinguished national security law and foreign policy expert, widely recognized for her insightful commentary on international affairs across major television networks such as BBC and Al Jazeera. She has served as a trusted advisor to heads of state, members of the U.S. Congress, ambassadors, CEOs, leaders of non-governmental organizations, and high net worth individuals, offering strategic guidance on a broad array of issues. As a partner of Adome Advisory Group PLLC, Joanna leads the firm's global public policy practice, where she provides strategic guidance on matters including international trade, critical minerals, America First Doctrine, debt financing for infrastructure and development projects in emerging markets, sanctions compliance, U.S. legislative processes, diplomacy, and high-level public relations. She also imparts her expertise as an adjunct professor at Harvard University, where she teaches courses on U.S. foreign policy and the African Continental Free Trade Area, AFCFTA. Ms. LeBlanc holds a Doctor of Jurisprudence from Indiana University, Robert H. McKinney School of Law, with a concentration in international law, and a Master's of Laws, George Washington University Law School. And a Master's of Law in National Security and U.S. Foreign Relations Law from the George Washington University Law School. She also earned a Master's of Applied Social Sciences in Public Administration from Florida A&M University and a Bachelor of Arts in Political Science from Bethune-Cookman University. In 2019, Joanna was honored to deliver the commencement address at her alma mater, BCU, where she was awarded an honorary doctorate degree by the university's president and board of trustees in recognition of her leadership and public service. Ms. Joanna, please join us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Elidora. Good afternoon, everyone. As she indicated, my name is Joanna Leblanc. I am incredibly happy to be here today, but most importantly, to be able to present on this important topic. As an educator, my job is always to teach. And even as an advisor to various stakeholders and individuals and entities, my job is always to teach. Somehow, I always find myself teaching. So today's presentation is to, one, educate the public on U.S. foreign policy, how it's formulated, how it has been, how it is currently, and also to provide you with negotiation tools so that whether you are a corporation or a government, you will be able to properly negotiate and get what you want ultimately. So I am really excited that you all took the time out of your schedules to be here. But before I start, I would like to acknowledge a few people in the room. First, we have Ms. Barbara. Ms. Barbara is all the way from the U.S. She's in the front. She is the president of the International Law Section at the National Bar Association, which represents roughly 60,000 Black lawyers and judges across America. But what's important for you to know is that under Ms. Barbara's leadership, we recently signed a memorandum of understanding with the African Continental Free Trade Area to support with implementation. So what that means is that you have a group of 60,000 lawyers in America who are backing and supporting the implementation of the AFCFTA. So, Ms. Barbara, thank you for your commitment to our continent, and we're so happy you're here today. In addition to that, we have members of the embassy, the diplomatic corps, the embassy here in Algiers, who are represented. So thank you so much for coming. Okay, so again, the objective of today's presentation is to, one, understand the dynamics of the 2025 America First approach and how it shapes U.S. engagement with Africa across trade, investment, and security. Two, to gain practical negotiation frameworks for advancing African priorities while aligning with U.S. strategic interests where beneficial. 3, to identify concrete opportunities, opportunity areas from critical minerals to digital transformation to carbon credits, where Africa can leverage U.S. policy shifts to secure long-term advantage. So when we talk about this America First, everybody wants to, what is this America First? What is it about? What is happening in Washington? Okay, I'm going to walk you through the America First approach. The fact of the matter is, from a United States perspective, it's always been America First, right? Because as a nation, your job is to ensure that the interests, your strategic and your national security interests, are always protected. You have an obligation to your people to ensure that engagements that you enter into are beneficial to the homeland and its people. That is a reality, and it is a reality not just for America, but for countries around the world. So what are we seeing now? What is happening? So under past presidents or past administrations, the America First objective has been to maintain U.S. global dominance, national security, and economic interests. Under current administration, same core objective. Keep U.S. as the world's leading superpower. So the objective has not changed. It's just a matter of leadership has changed. So what about the branding aspect of America First? Under past administration, rarely branded as America First, right? Framed in terms of global leadership, shared values, or mutual benefit. Whereas under this current administration, which is a bit more bold, it explicitly brands America First as the central slogan of U.S. policy used in domestic and foreign messaging. That's the difference. What about approach to multilateralism, approach to working with the United Nations, the World Health Organization, and so on? Under past administration, engaged in multilateral bodies such as the UN, WTO, WHO, while advancing U.S. interest, work to shape rules from within. Under current administration, very skeptical toward multilateral institutions, withdraws, withholds funding, or sidelines them and prefer bilateral deals. And there are a number of reasons for this. Some of it is the administration has been looking at the data, and the data does not quite reflect the purpose of the U.S.'s contribution towards these organizations and what the U.S. is actually gaining from these various multilateral organizations. So therefore, they must be revisited. We must have different agreements, different parameters on how the engagement will continue, and in some cases, completely withdraw if it does not serve in the strategic interest of the American people under this current administration. What about diplomatic style? I think that's the part that a lot of us are not used to, right? Past administration often couched in cooperative language, even when prioritizing U.S. interests, maintain alliance optics. Whereas under this current administration, it's more direct, it's transactional, it's results-driven, openly ties support to tangible benefits for the United States, right? We have a current administration that is not good with the words, right? In terms of telling you all of the diplomatic language that should be used when results have not been achieved, right? This administration wants things to happen. If we're saying you're going to accomplish X, Y, and Z as a partner and as an ally, the U.S. expects that under this administration. And sometimes, even when you have countries where historically You have American companies that are based there and that are making money, but yet the country's foreign policy may be one that undermines our national and strategic interests. You will see that the administration takes a different position, which is very different because historically, whenever you have a situation where American companies benefit greatly from a particular country, usually we kind of look the other way, and we kind of try to work with them a little bit to see what can be done in order to maintain that relationship because of the American company that is in that country. You have to understand the connection between corporations and working with Congress to push certain objectives and to push certain policies, which we'll talk about a bit more later. What about trade policy? Under past administration, pursued free trade agreements, but included protections for key U.S. sectors, disputes handled quietly. Well, we saw President Zelensky, how that dispute was handled in the open, right? Of course, it wasn't about trade. It was about it was about the conflict between Ukraine and Russia. This administration did not mince with words, right? Disputes are handled in the public, right? Under this current administration is that robust use of tariffs, willing to disrupt existing trade deals, public pressure on partners for better terms. And better terms mean terms that this administration deems will benefit the American economy and the American people. So talk about AGOA, right, which probably dead. This administration prefers bilateral engagements versus multilateral trade agreements. So for those of you that do business under AGOA, I highly recommend that you take some time to reach out to your various associations to see what is the step forward. So what about great power competition? Past administration managed competition with China and Russia through alliances, diplomacy, and selective economic pressure. Current administration frames China and Russia as explicit central threats, openly presses partners to align with U.S. positions. That is a fact. If you are a superpower, you want to maintain that superpower, you will have to make certain decisions, and those decisions include using your leverage to get certain countries to align more towards your country versus another country. It's rational, it makes sense. And what about the domestic political audience under the America First? Past administration, foreign policy partly shaped by U.S. strategic, partly by domestic politics. Current administration, foreign policy heavily influenced by domestic voter messaging. Visible wins prioritized for the U.S. electorates. So the American people domestically play a critical role in how the United States engage with its partners around the world. So under this current administration, when it comes to the guide that drives foreign policy, there are three critical questions that must be asked, right? So for every dollar that the United States spends, for every program that we fund, for every policy we pursue, must be justified by answering three simple questions. 1, does it make America safer? 2, does it make America stronger? 3, does it make America more prosperous? And as a taxpayer, I can tell you, if my money is being spent abroad when it comes to various international engagements, I want to know, how is it benefiting me domestically? And this is what this administration is ensuring happens. Wants to ensure that before the U.S. invests, it is tied to the homeland, right? So if there's no nexus between the homeland and what is happening internationally, it needs to be revisited, okay, under this current administration. So who are the different agencies that are responsible for carrying out foreign policy in America? You have the Department of State, which are the diplomats here in the front. The Department of State, you have headquarters in DC, the State Department, and you have various missions around the world, and their job is to advance U.S. interest. So every single one of them in this room is here to advance the United States interest. So for every country, the United States has a foreign policy towards that country, right? And the job of the diplomats is to ensure that U.S. foreign policy is protected and that interest is very clear. And then you also have the National Security Council, which is based inside the White House, and they advise the president on various foreign policy related matters. And then you also have the Department of Defense, which manages military aspects. You have the CIA and the ODNI. These are intelligence agencies. And they gather intelligence all around the world, because it is through that kind of intelligence that the United States is able to make informed decisions about the way forward in terms of its strategic relationship with countries around the world. So you have agents all around different countries, and sometimes, and in most cases, well, just every case, you don't know who they are, right? There could be someone who has a shop, right? There could be someone who is a socialite, but they work for one of these intelligence agencies, and their job is to collect and gather information to ensure that the homeland is protected and that our interests are protected as an American state. And then you have the Department of Treasury, right? And then you have the Department of Homeland Security, and then you have the Department of Commerce, and so on. So these are the different agencies that are responsible for carrying out foreign policy. So if you were in Washington and you were lobbying, right, and your issue has something to do with, let's say, trade, for example, you would want to make sure you meet with folks at the Department of Commerce, right, at USTR, United States Trade Representative Office. You would meet with some folks in Congress under the Ways and Means Committee on the House side, and you would meet with folks at the White House, the National Security Council as well, to make sure that you touch on all the different parties and agencies that may have a voice on this matter. So, and you also have the United States Congress that play a role in this process as well. The United States Congress, which is where I used to work as a legislative director, the US Congress has what you call the power of the purse, right? Congress controls, appropriates for foreign aid, defense, and diplomatic initiatives shaping scope and direction of US engagement. Congress has legislative authority, meaning that their job is to legislate, right? Laws, trade agreements, and so on. And they have oversight and accountability. So the U.S. Congress has various committees. Like, for example, on the House side, you have 438 members on the House side, right? And the different members serve on various committees. You have committees on foreign affairs. You have committee on Department of Homeland Security. Just about all the issues you could think of, there's a committee that handles that. You also have the committee that deals with appropriations, right? So the agencies that fall under those various committees, the Congress has oversight over the committee members within that committee has oversight over those various agencies. And then Congress also has the power to declare war, right? The Constitution makes it very clear that only Congress can declare war. Now, we know there have been some instances where that was not always applied. That could be a whole lecture by itself for another day. But while the president is the commander-in-chief, Congress has the constitutional authority to declare war and regulate the use of military force abroad. So, understanding what you know now, what are some of the negotiation framework for Africa? One, when you are negotiating with the United States, you must know the U.S.'s interest. You do not go into a meeting without understanding the U.S. interest on this particular matter. Don't do it. And sometimes it's even useful to understand even the interest of the person you're sitting in front of as well, because that can also influence the outcome. So we must frame African priorities as solving U.S. problems, right? So you find gaps, you identify gaps and say, hey, perhaps this is how we can fill those gaps, right? So know the U.S. interest. It is pivotal before you go into any negotiations, whether you are a senior advisor to the president of Nigeria or the president of Ghana, which I saw a few folks registered from different office of presidents. Before your boss goes to Washington or has a conversation and wants to negotiate with Washington, they must know the interest. And sometimes what the outside world thinks is the interest is not the interest, which is why it's important that you work with people on the ground who are really engaged and involved in the U.S. policy process. And also to leverage multipolar, right? So U.S. engagement versus China, right, versus EU Gulf competition. You have to find the leverage, right? You understand that. You have China, you have the United States. That means something. It has implications, right? So position your country or your corporation based on this particular point that I just made. And then you have transactional bargaining, right? Clear asks and gives in negotiation. Be very clear about what you want, okay? And also to building coalition. Oftentimes, when I was in Congress as a staffer, you'll see different organizations, different countries come, and they want to lobby on a particular issue. And I will say, well, why don't you form a coalition and lobby this issue? Because it's actually more advantageous when you have 3, 4, 5 countries saying the same thing versus one country, right? So build a coalition when negotiating with the U.S. So these are some of the basic negotiation framework, and obviously it's a bit more nuanced, there's more information, but for the sake of time, we can't go through every single scenario. But these are the things that are vital when you are considering negotiating with the United States government. So at this time, my portion of the presentation is over. We're going to have our next presenter. After she speaks, I will come back up here and then I will open the floor for questions and we will have a conversation. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. LeBlanc. So now we'll be introducing our next speaker, Ms. Chinwe Esemai, who would be joining us online. Ms. Chinwe Esemai is a Harvard Law School trained, multiple award-winning attorney, author, and keynote speaker with over 2 decades of experience in law and global compliance. As the first chief anti-bribery and corruption officer, and the first chief compliance officer for legacy franchises at Citigroup. Ms. Chinua has made history and continues to shape the future of finance. She is the president and CEO of Scepter 3 Global Advisors, a strategic advisory firm providing a suite of compliance and risk management services to high-growth financial and technology companies, banks, and governments. She is a trusted advisor for firms, founders, and regulations at the highest levels around the world. Chinwe obtained her Juris Doctor from Harvard Law School and her Bachelor of Arts, summa cum laude, from the City College of New York. Ms. Chinwe, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, and hello, everyone. Thank you, Joanna, for those initial remarks, and a couple of thoughts that come to mind even before I get into the second half of this program. The first is a conversation I was once a part of when we were evaluating in a global forum a number of innovations. And something that someone said in that meeting stuck with me, and it stuck with me. This was in 2017, and it has stuck with me since. And what the person said in that meeting was, the future of Africa is aid. The future of Africa is Africans holding out their hands and begging for aid. And the reason this individual shared this view is to support the idea that the only solutions, the only technologies, the only infrastructure that needed to be invested in were solutions that had to do with aid, because Africa would be stuck in wars and only need aid from the rest of the world. Now, the beauty of the conversation we're having today is that we're in a very different world. We're in a world where we know that the future of Africa is not aid. We're in a world where the future of Africa is strategic partnerships. The future of Africa is innovation. The future of Africa is opportunity. And so with that in mind, and just also again reflecting, the second idea is reflecting on what my colleague Joanna just shared, is a quote from Nelson Mandela, which said, "I never lose, I either win or learn." So in the first part of this conversation, we learned, we all heard about the US foreign policy. We've come to understand a little bit better what America First actually means. Now, in the second part of this conversation, we'll talk about how we can all collectively win. So here we will highlight some of the critical areas where Africa can focus its attention as we look to continue to build these strategic alliances with the United States. And so America First in 2025 and beyond emphasizes security. It emphasizes secure supply chains, and it also emphasizes, as we discussed, mutually beneficial relationships. So the first area is critical minerals and energy transition. I think anyone who's paying close attention to conversations understands that the US is very keenly focused on critical minerals. And Africa has been very blessed and is richly endowed with vast deposits of critical minerals. So here's an opportunity where African countries can partner with the US currently and moving forward. In addition, with regard to energy transition, there's an opportunity, again, leveraging our key minerals on the African continent to support energy transition goals, whether it's electric vehicles or it's renewables or other resources that are worthy of focus. As it relates to energy as well, carbon credits and sustainability models. Again, in this area, I will say this is one of the areas that's highly underutilized on the African continent. I think there's a key opportunity for African countries to take leadership as it relates to carbon credits by framing measurable, reliable, and verified resources as it relates to carbon credits and sustainability. On agribusiness, we have an opportunity to evolve and develop local processing hubs to meet U.S. and regional food security needs. There's a critical opportunity here. Again, Africa has vast deposits, and there's an opportunity to ensure that the infrastructure is ready for the next chapter. Next, we have, on the next slide, digital trade and fintech. So the US is prioritizing digitization, the US is prioritizing technology, the US is also prioritizing artificial intelligence. So as it relates to payments, trade finance, and tools that are aligned with US standards, there's also an opportunity. Next, we also have vast opportunities as it relates to trade infrastructure and logistics, whether it's the ports, the corridors, or platforms that can ensure reliability, again, as the US looks to diversify supply chains around the world. On the next slide, I'll just highlight some of the risks and enablers. So we need to stay aware of additional policy shifts that could happen. It's very important that we don't get into a comfortable position where we think everything's stagnant now, we know what the lay of the land is. The truth is, the only thing that's certain is change, and I think we can expect that there will be additional changes as well. On the governance and ESG side, there's an opportunity again to address credibility gaps for the African continent. On infrastructure, regulatory, and logistics, I will say there's a lot of interest on the continent in foreign direct investments. And obviously, the first thing that foreign investors are looking for is, what's the regulatory environment? What's the reliability? What's the ease of doing business? I think there are a number of opportunities around that, and I think there are opportunities and levers we can pull. So what are some of the enabling moves that we can take under current circumstances? One is to develop robust regulatory frameworks, compliance, an area that I know I've spent quite a bit of time working not only in New York, but globally, and seeing the level of evolution that we have even in countries across Asia that are very comparable to African countries. There's a lot of opportunity to continue to evolve our regulatory frameworks and also the compliance controls. There are opportunities for blended finance and public-private partnerships, whether across investment banking or across the private sector, to ensure that the public sector is enabling finance across the board. Now, workforce certification and technical readiness. I think this is a really critical point, because when we have foreign investors or US and Africa partnerships, quite often you find that global companies may send their employees, whether it's in the US or across Europe, to the African continent. One of the things that's really critical is to make sure that the workforce on the continent is highly skilled and highly trained, so that we are able to reinvest in our very talented population and to ensure that a lot of those jobs do stay on the continent and help to continue to support ongoing development. Now, what are the strategic takeaways that we've discussed here? I would just highlight 3 of those. The first is that Africa must engage US on mutual benefit. It's very important that we engage on that mutual benefit and not on aid or dependency, but that we think critically about what are our priorities and then how do we leverage those for opportunity. The second is just to realize and recognize, as we've been discussing, that America First does create leverage points. And it's our job to understand what those leverage points are and ensure that Africa takes advantage of those for its benefit. And then also thinking about long-term strategic alliances, and where that advantage is in the policy alignment and strategic storytelling. And as Joanna was mentioning earlier, when we as African countries walk into meetings with American authorities or with American companies, it's very important that we're thinking through the long-term strategic advantages for both sides. And so just moving on to the next slide, we'll just touch on very quickly, and this is the last slide before we take questions and we share our contact information. What are some of the ways that ADOMI and SEPTA 3 can provide, what are the ways that we're already providing support for different leaders and businesses around the world? The first is policy negotiation strategies that are tailored to US incentives and the US government at highest levels. And so as our African countries are looking to identify foreign investors and partners in the US, it's very important that the African countries are getting advocacy at the highest levels as well. So that's one of the things we've been able to help a number of our African governments with. In addition, from a lobbying and strategic communications perspective, when it comes to strategic communications, this is one of the areas where we have identified gaps where African countries are making a lot of headway, but not necessarily telling the story. So if we're not telling the stories about how Africa is changing the narrative, shifting the narrative, whether through investing in various aspects of infrastructure, and also more strategically aligning itself with foreign players, global players around the world, if we're not telling that story, it becomes really, really difficult to attract investors, because we have to remember that the narrative that a number of foreign investors have in their heads are very outdated. And so we can never overemphasize the importance of thinking critically about being very intentional about our strategic communications across sectors and at the highest levels, whether it's with media outlets or in different communication forums. So we've also been involved in structuring sovereign and corporate deals to help attract US investors. So making sure that we're helping the sovereigns on the African continent identify very highly curated investors, whether it's within investment banking, where I spent a couple of decades, or across different sectors within the US. We've also helped with market entry and high-level investor connections. So with US investors or US businesses looking to enter markets around the world, we help them demystify it, we help them understand the regulatory environment, we help remove roadblocks, we help with the legal conversations, working with local counsel in those jurisdictions, working with the governments as well. We also provide sovereign and corporate advisory on carbon credits and sustainability strategies. As I mentioned earlier, we really believe this is a highly underutilized area in the African continent. As we reflect on the number of foreign companies that are based on the continent doing business, whether it's in the energy sector or various areas impacting natural resources, there hasn't been enough focus and strategic attention towards how we ensure that in partnership between the public sector, the government, and those private companies, that we are pulling all of the levers on whether it's carbon credits, sustainability, or reinvesting in renewable sources and in the economy. Finally, as you can imagine, based on my background as well, we do a lot of compliance-related advisory, whether it's financial crime and anti-bribery, where I spent a lot of time, but just in general, making sure that there's a solid regulatory framework in place. Because when we have weak regulatory systems, what tends to happen is it scares foreign investors away. Foreign investors have a sense that their funds are not safe and that there isn't a predictable environment where they can do business. And so I know I may have gone through that a little bit quickly. We also have, we'll have room for questions. We have our contact information up there as well. Please feel free to reach out to us, whether by email or on WhatsApp. We're very accessible and happy to partner both with partners both in the private and the public sectors. So with that, I'll turn it back to you all in the room.
Thank you very much. So now we'll welcome Ms. LeBlanc to give us her remarks. Thank you.
Slide, please. Okay, so as they are working through the technical difficulty, again, thank you so much, Chinwe, for your presentation. Greatly appreciated. So for us, for me as an educator, and for Chinwe as a practicing lawyer, at the firm, what we do all day is we sit down, we analyze situations around the world where people may not feel too good about. We find opportunities, right? So instead of complaining about the challenges, we look for gaps, and then we bring those solutions over to potential clients, governments, so that we can support them in achieving their ultimate goals. So again, today's session was designed just for that, because we know that there had been a great deal of conversations and misunderstanding about this America First thing. You guys hear about it on BBC, on Al Jazeera, on CNN, on Fox. And I know many people in the world that we're in the line of work that we do, have been asking about it. They wanted it to be somewhat demystified. And as you can see, America First is not new. The only difference is the execution of it. It's nothing new. America has always maintained that when it engages with countries around the world, that its strategic and national security interests are protected, and ultimately the homeland and the people benefit. So this is nothing new. I just want to make sure I can't reemphasize on that enough. So at this time, okay. At this time, I would like to open the floor for questions. A number of people submitted questions in advance, but I'll allow those of you who are in the room who may have questions to go ahead and ask. So as private sector folks, right, the question is, how may we assist you? What questions do you have? How can Chinwe and I assist you? What, during our presentation, you did not understand? What do you want us to elaborate on more? How may we assist you? Don't be shy. Yes, go ahead.
My name is Phillips.
Yes.
And the name of my company is White Rock Agro Allied Services, Nigeria. I'm from Nigeria. Now, in Africa, with special reference to West Africa, generally, the government are embarking on the policy of discouraging the export of raw materials. That is raw materials in its raw form. Now, what that means is that you have to process or partially add value to some of those raw materials before you take them out of the country. Now, my question is, for me as an agro processor and a value chain expert, I've spent a situation where we set up a hub in some of the states in the US, one. And if that's the case, how do we break through? How do we go around the policy, the tariff policy, for instance? Now, because if you have such up, we're able to aggregate a lot of raw materials in its semi-form into the US market, and then what that will do for us is to attract investment into Africa or West Africa, as the case may be. So what help do you have in this regard? That's number one. Number two, if you look at some African countries, the US policy, the current US policy, I don't think is 100% favorable, especially those aids that were being granted farmers. All of those things have been stopped. We're appealing. My question is, the second question, what are you doing to ensure that this aid returns to Africa? Because from what I heard from the second speaker, he said policy must it must be policy that ensure that America is stronger, America is safer, America is more prosperous. I think this policy have alliance with those three ingredients you just mentioned. So what are you doing? What assistance can we get through you guys to ensure that these aids return to Africa? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Should I go ahead? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So thank you very much for that question, my Nigerian brother. With regard to the manufacturing within Nigeria and some of the local policies, I think, again, it will be very specific to your business, where you are in your business and where you want to go. There are opportunities to incorporate subsidiaries in the US. There is also going to be a need to analyze some of the trade agreements that are already in place. We would need to look at, I know Joanna mentioned earlier about AGOA, but again, there may also be opportunities to strategically partner with specific US firms in your industry. So again, it would really depend on where you are, both in terms of branding, where you are in terms of your business, and then market positioning will be very important as well. And so I think there are opportunities there, but it would be very important to look into the current free trade agreements and how exactly those would apply to your industry. With regard to aid, again, that's a very challenging topic. We obviously cannot make any declarations about the changes in the aid policy. As you have seen, there were a lot of changes that were made, again, looking to align with strategic American interests, so looking at how some of what was happening overseas was aligning with the US. Personally, I do think it was a bit of a point of a correction. And it would be important to look at, over time, how things stabilize and how they evolve in the future. But it would be very difficult for anyone to make any guarantees about bringing back aid. But with regard to what you described with your business, I think we can definitely speak in more detail, but those are the main areas that it would be important to explore.
And then if I may add, thank you, Chinwe, if I may add to that, I think your question deals, at least some elements of it deals with country to country, right? As I mentioned earlier, we know that AGOA expires September of this year, which is this month. There's a possibility that there might be some extension, but we don't know. But what I do know is that this current administration prioritizes bilateral agreements versus multilateral agreements. AGOA is multilateral because many countries on the continent are beneficiaries to it, right? So it might be something that your government consider to negotiate a potential free trade agreement with the United States. I know the government of Kenya under the first Trump administration was in the process, actually they had finalized a free trade agreement, and then government changed and it was never implemented. But right now, Kenya is in the process of negotiating an FTA with the United States. So I think that, again, understanding the US preference, right? The preference is not multilateral, it's bilateral, right? So let's see how potentially your government could engage in a free trade agreement with the United States, or negotiate a free trade agreement. And then in terms of, you made a comment about the minerals, right? Resources on the continent, right? So one of the most transformative continental policy that exists is the Continental Free Trade Area, right? You're talking about a trade law with various protocols attached to it that has the potential of increasing the collective GDPs of African nations by more than 3 trillion USD, right? And in addition to that, we're talking about lifting more than 30 million people out of abject poverty. So the continent has an agenda to engage in intra-Africa trade, right? Meaning that we trade with each other, with other nations. Now, obviously, we all know the challenges, the gaps, right? Infrastructure issues, visa issues, and a host of challenges, right? But nonetheless, this is a transformative agenda that will move the continent forward. So as nations around the world or implemented policies that may not necessarily be in the favor of various countries, look to your neighbor and trade with them, right? And I can say this, I'm not a US government official, I'm a private sector person, right? And our job in most cases is to give clients options on what they should consider. So you do have the continental free trade area for countries to trade with each other. And it's a continent of 1.4 billion people. So the market is huge, it's significant. But obviously there are some challenges that must be addressed in order for the AFCFTA to be truly implemented and realized. So at this time, I would like to open the floor for the next question. Thank you for your question, sir.
Hi, my name is Saleh Harry. I'm Algerian from Algeria, the American Chamber of Commerce in Algeria. My question is, do you think that the current American administration will be in favor of a US-Algerian double taxation treaty? Do you think that the current American administration will be in favor of the US-Algerian double taxation treaty for two reasons, according to your presentation, Joanna? Is that the first one was the Algeria has got already a double taxation treaty with China and with Russia, with another 37 countries. And the second one, you said earlier that it has to be specific and very direct with the current administration. It is that it make already both investors from both countries twice more expensive, because since the investor will be paying taxes from the other sides of the countries, if an investor comes and there is no treaty between the two countries, you'll be paying taxes in Algeria as well as in the United States, and vice versa. So that's my question.
Thank you for that question. I will touch on some aspect of it after the session. We can speak one-on-one because there's some sensitivity around that. You asked a two-pronged question. I lost my train of thought on the first prong. Chamber of Commerce, correct? Sir, could you please bring back the microphone, please?
The American Chamber of Commerce in Algeria, the AmCham.
Yes. No, you asked a two-pronged question,
yes.
Right? What was the first prong again?
The first one was the double taxation treaty, because you said earlier that according to the double taxation treaty is that we in Algeria already signed the double taxation treaty with China and with Russia and with 37 other countries, which make them already more competitive. And the second one is that by not signing the double taxation treaty, it means that any investor from other side of the countries will be paying taxation on, which makes us or the American investing here already more expensive when it comes to that, when it comes to investing here in Algeria.
No. Thank you for repeating your question. Sometimes I tend to lose my train of thought. As I said earlier, we'll talk offline together on just some sensitivity around it. But what I will say is that under this administration, in terms of agreements, as I said earlier, this is an administration where, unlike other administrations, in order to have a negotiation or some kind of deals, it goes through so many different agencies, right? Congress has to say a say-so. The relevant agencies have to say a say-so. Meetings after meetings after meetings, right? Whereas under this administration, I think it's both good and maybe sometimes bad, that you can actually walk in and walk out with an agreement if you're focused and strategic enough, right? That's good. But on the flip side to it, for some, they may say creates a level of uncertainty. Like, for example, Brazil has been imposed a 50% tariffs, right? Which we know the American consumers drank a lot of coffee from Brazil. So what does that mean for the rest of the world, right? Places like Kenya, Ethiopia could leverage that 50% tariff that's been imposed on Brazil to then start bringing their coffee into the US market. But what happens if the president of Brazil goes to Washington and strikes a deal with the president while your coffee is en route to the United States, right? So that's kind of like the uncertainty. So it's both good and bad, but nonetheless, I think government-to-government engagement is always the best. And when you're doing government-to-government engagement, and even as a chamber, I always say this: hire people to work with you, right, who understand the terrain of Washington. Washington is a place that, unless you've worked inside some of these institutions, it can be very tricky. So my law school training did not prepare me for how things actually get done in Washington. It was not until I started working at the US Congress as a legislative director, being a liaison to the White House, the State Department, and various agencies, that I really understood how things get done. So it's important for governments, once they've identified what they're trying to achieve, and not just governments, even the chambers, right, and the different corporations, you work with individuals and firms that actually has the expertise, right, to be able to position you for a more favorable outcome. That is vital, because oftentimes you meet with folks, again, as a senior staffer, I will meet with people from all over the continent, government officials, companies, or whatnot. And they will come to the office and they had no idea what the US priorities were. They had no idea. If you're going to negotiate and engage, even with the point that you're making, right, you must understand what are the priorities. And then from there, you can build a strategy on how you could potentially garner a favorable outcome. So thank you, and we'll discuss the other prong one-on-one. Yes, go ahead.
Thank you very much. My name is Wale Famarewa, and it's great to be here. I was just taking another look at the theme of this gathering, which is turning policy shifts into strategic opportunities. I really appreciate the example you cited with respect to Brazil and potentially what it could mean for African exporters of coffee. And I was wondering if you could just take a moment to highlight from your experience under this administration the opportunities, some opportunities that you have seen that potentially Africa could leverage given the new regime we're seeing in the United States.
Yeah, I think Chinwe can respond to that. I think that was part of her presentation. So Chinwe, you have the floor.
Yes, just to the point of you were making, I think there are, for example, if we were to take carbon credits as an example, where there are policy shifts in the US and people may think, for example, sustainability may not be as much of a priority, we don't believe that Africans should just look at that at face value. So for example, as I was mentioning, we have a number of global companies that are doing business on the African continent. And those global companies have sustainability priorities that they've committed to in the long term. And a number of these companies are still prioritizing sustainability as a focus area. So whether it's carbon credits or similar opportunities, African governments can take advantage of the current situation in making sure that they're crafting very strategic carbon credits priorities that work with those international companies that are doing business on the continent to ensure that the African companies, and we've had several engagements with different countries, including in Latin America, who are actively taking advantage of this situation to raise capital for infrastructure projects. And so I think that's something that we've done, and again, we can work offline with folks that are focused on that space. But that's an area of opportunity where there is a policy shift, and African countries can be a little bit more intentional in working with global companies that are doing business on the continent. For example, take Coca-Cola, who uses a vast amount of natural resources such as water for manufacturing and production. There are specific strategies that African countries can implement in working with a company like Coca-Cola to ensure that that company is reinvesting in renewable opportunities on the continent and also reinvesting in whether it's through carbon credits or renewable energy sources. So that's just one example, and I think there are many. Digitization is another one. I know I mentioned that as well. That's an area of enormous opportunity because the administration is prioritizing. I'll give you a financial services example. The prior administration, there was a lot of pressure on things like digital assets and cryptocurrencies. This administration has done a complete turnaround. There's been radical advancements in the area of digital assets under this administration. We know that in Africa, there are a number of countries. If you look at Nigeria, if you look at Kenya, you look at a number of countries on the continent, digital assets are also a very strong and active space. So how do we make sure that our companies, our startups that are investing in digital assets technologies and fintech and other aspects of digitization, that they are taking advantage of the fact that this administration is open and supportive of digital assets and is open and supportive of fintech and digitization. So again, those are just two areas that we've seen radical shifts that are presenting massive opportunities.
Thank you, Chinwe. And one of the things that I think it's important for those that are interested in doing business with the United States is follow what's happening on the ground. Things are moving rapidly, right? Today's policy may not be tomorrow's policy in some instances. Follow what's happening on the ground and look for gaps, right? Especially if you are a business where you sell goods around the world. Identify where are the high tariffs, where are they? And who are they selling to? And who imposed those tariffs? You might be the alternative, right? Because at the end of the day, what we do know is that the tariffs that are imposed are ultimately passed on to the consumers, right? And consumers don't want to pay a lot of money. They want to keep their money, right? So I think that's important just to make sure you stay abreast of what's happening in the U.S. And figure out where are the gaps and how can you position your company, your country, your trade organization to fill those gaps, right? Just for me in life in general, I never see problems. I never see problems. The whole world could be on fire. I see an opportunity. Right? I never see problems, right? So if you look for the opportunities, you will see them. But if you choose to look for the problems, that's all you will see. So with that being said, next question, please. Yes, go ahead.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Nini Farid from Algeria. Why do we observe a lack of support from the U.S. administration for direct investments outside of the oil and energy sector in Africa and Algeria in particular? What?
Could you please repeat that? Oh, tu parles français?
Oui.
Dis en français, s'il vous plaît. And
pourquoi on observe que l'administration américaine n'investit pas dans des secteurs à part l'énergie?
Excusez-moi, vous pouvez répéter s'il vous plaît, je ne vous ai pas entendu.
Pourquoi on observe que l'administration américaine n'investit pas?
Approchez votre micro.
Pourquoi on observe que l'administration américaine n'investit pas dans des secteurs à part le secteur de l'énergie elle n'investit pas dans des secteurs, par exemple les prestations, le fintech, je ne sais pas. Elle investit seulement dans le secteur de l'énergie, en Afrique et surtout en Algérie.
Donc en Afrique et surtout en Algérie. Okay, so he is saying that why does the American administration only invest in the energy sector, mostly in Africa and Algeria? Why not in other sectors, for example, in fintech? That's what he said. That's his observation. So he would like to understand why.
No, I think that's an excellent question. As you know, there are 55 countries on the African continent. We are familiar with the U.S. priorities towards some of the countries, not all of them. In the case of Algeria, we don't know why that is, so I don't want to give you a wrong answer. But the U.S. Embassy is right here. You can ask them because they're a representative of the Trump administration. So afterwards, you could ask them. Okay, next question, please.
Hello, I'm Sausen. I'm a Tunisian social entrepreneur and I run an incubator to support social enterprise. I was wondering how much the US new administration still care about human rights and doing business with countries with bad human rights records.
Yeah, I think it's a good question. We saw that there was a great deal of cutback from USAID and some of the organizations that was providing aid to the continent. But what we did see, though, however, was that there was a reverse in policy in terms of providing support for those who are HIV positive, which is making sure the rights of those people are protected, that they have access to medical support and so on. So there has been some changes in some of the different areas. Like, for example, you had countries that were promoting maybe LGBTQ rights, and it's not consistent with the objectives of this administration. And it's nothing new, by the way. Every administration that comes on board has its set of priorities, right? And there are cuts that are made. There are increases that are made. And it's nothing new. It happens under every administration, right? So I think that to some extent, there are some concerns because there was a reversal of policies to ensure that those who are HIV positive receive some level of care and that there's some funding available to various countries. So that's to the extent that I can respond. Okay? Thank you. I hope that helped. Next question.
Hello, everybody. Yes, I'm Mr. Lopez from France. Maybe I represent the Algerian diaspora as well. So I'm happy to be here because I am proud to represent maybe a little community. I wish more for this community, beautiful community for Algerian people. My question is very simple. Since 2 days, I come as freelance and I simply ask different young peoples here in the saloon. I think it was amount maybe more than Algerian startups, right? In food truck, for instance, in industrial, in trade, different buyers or sellers for different products. It was very, very interesting. I need to urge them. I need some different information because these people are still waiting for a contract. What I mean is, I just keep in touch yesterday with the group Arabic British BACB. Network is based for principally, I think it's Libya, and for the different countries in Africa. They don't work with Europe, not yet. but they work with Turkey. So my question is how to help these young startups, Algerian as well, because they're waiting for a contract. They need to be to get a trust with this group like BACB bank, and I'm wondering if there are other simple connection with other different bank. I saw, for instance, yesterday, Vista Bank, if I'm not wrong. I didn't communicate yet with them, so I think if I have time to talk with them in order to find some solution, some connection with Algerian startups. The main solution, we have no enough time. I mean, if I'm not wrong, we have today, so we need to be very rapid. Lady, thank you thank you very much for your attention, because if I understand, you are working with America, right? Just America? Okay, okay.
I represent a private sector, a firm in the United States.
Perfect. So, if I understand, you are interested. I mean, if we get connection with this young startup for different fields, we can conclude a contract, right?
I'm not quite sure.
Okay, so it's just only for America.
Let's talk offline, because I think there might be some complexities around your question. So let's talk offline, okay?
Okay.
So thank you so much. I appreciate it. So before I go to the next person, the person before her who spoke asked questions around human rights and the cut of funding. During my presentation, I talked about there are 3 guiding principles, right, that dictates foreign policy under this administration. So for every dollar the United States spends, for every program the United States funds, and every policy that the United States pursue must be justified by answering 3 questions. 1, does it make America safer? 2, does it make America stronger? 3, does it make America more prosperous? So always use that 3-pronged test when you are analyzing U.S. foreign policy or your country's policy towards the United States, or when you are assessing the different types of programs that may have been impacted by various cuts through this administration. And be honest, right? Does it help us or does it help the United States, right? How does it, because if you were on the other side, right, that's how you have to think about it. If you are on the other side and you're financing a project, for example, right, you will want to know how that investment is going to strengthen you or your industry or your company as well. So always think about it objectively, right? And look at those three analyses. But of course, we live in a multipolar world and we are interconnected. Let's make no mistake, we are interconnected. And I think anybody who fails to understand that probably was not around during COVID, right? Because we saw how one person was infected in Wuhan, China, led to the collapse of our economies, led to the death of millions of people in the United States and around the world, right? So we have to invest in some of these programs to ensure that we're all safe, right? So let's not kid ourselves, but at the same token, I think it's important that you go back and look at those three questions that the State Department looks at when assessing U.S. foreign policy towards other nations around the world. Someone else had their hand up? Go ahead.
Thank you very much. My name is Opiongo. I'm from Nigeria. My question is around, I don't know if you said it because I came in a little late when you are winding up. This question around if America has a strategic policy framework and engagement framework with regards to African countries that are interested in producing and processing critical minerals and transition minerals, and also around issues of trade infrastructure and logistics.
Chenwe, would you like to answer that?
Yes, and just very quickly, as we had discussed earlier, yes, those are all, the areas you mentioned are all areas of priority for the U.S., the current U.S. administration. And so the second thing we've also talked about is for individual countries, it's been very important to the administration to have bilateral conversations where the U.S. administration is speaking to, in this case, it would be Nigeria, around whether it's critical minerals or logistics or some of the infrastructure development initiatives. But one of the biggest takeaways that we've highlighted is when companies or the country is going into those conversations is making sure that there's an understanding of what the U.S.'s priorities are. So depending on what the critical minerals are, what is the U.S. looking to accomplish from those negotiations? And then keeping in mind the country's own interests, making sure that the African country walking in also knows what is most important for that country to accomplish. And so I think that the short answer to it is yes, we do think that those are very core priority areas for this administration. And I would also say, because I don't know that we've really made the strong tie, is with regard to the business initiatives, whether it's critical minerals or infrastructure, when the U.S. is thinking about the African continent, there's a strong prioritization of security as well. So as you're thinking through what the African priorities are, keeping in mind, and really that goes to the first prong that Joanna shared, which is, does it make America safer? So sometimes that could look like investing in specific critical minerals that support American production or support American defense or different priorities that the U.S. may have. So I would say short answer to your question is yes, and we can obviously more as needed.
Thank you, Chinwe. And as it relates to critical minerals and how I talked about earlier how this administration is, it has to be mutually beneficial, right? So we look at what happened we look at the critical minerals deal with DRC and Rwanda, right? So, I mean, DRC is literally giving the U.S. access to $24 trillion worth of critical minerals in exchange for support, right? In exchange to bring peace, right? So it's a negotiation where you may not agree with it, I may not agree with it, right? Human rights groups may not agree with it, but the two parties that are in leadership have come together and they have sat down and they have said, this is the type of engagement that we're going to undertake that would be mutually beneficial for both nations. So critical minerals for peace, right? So when we talk about administration being, making sure that it's mutually beneficial, this is an example of that, right? So when you're going to the negotiation table, as a government, you want to look at what are your assets, right? Because the world is changing, right? The United States way of executing U.S. foreign policy has somewhat shifted. So you want to ensure that to maintain the relationship and to maintain and to be able to receive the benefits that you are hoping to receive as a state or as a corporation, that you really assess the situation and assess what is it that you can provide in exchange for something else. Like we say in law, quid pro quo. But in any event, I have a number of questions that were submitted to me in advance. Okay, let's see. Chinwe, this question is for you. Marquis asks, as global markets evolve, what are some innovative ways Africa can position its sustainability and infrastructure projects to attract long-term investment, and complement U.S. private sector priorities?
Yes, so thank you for that, Joanna. So I think and at the risk of, I don't want to repeat myself, but as it relates to sustainability, I do think that the private sector priorities continue to be, those are still there. So they haven't gone back on their commitment. So you have certain companies that have certain reduction targets for a certain year. They're still moving actively towards those. And so when an African government engages with those private sector entities, the African government should be thinking about acquisition of carbon credits themselves. They should be thinking about how those companies can reinvest in the economies, and they should have very specific priorities around sustainability that would then enable the African countries to raise funds to invest in infrastructure projects. Now, some of this ends up being very industry specific. I know I mentioned Coca-Cola, not just to pick on them, but because it's one of the companies that I think we're all familiar with that has been very active on the continent. A number of the energy companies as well, the big ones that you would all think about, that have been very active on the continent as well. I think most of these companies have set carbon targets. They've set sustainability targets. So African countries need to have a very direct strategy with each of those countries, going by industry. You start with energy, you look at manufacturing. Within manufacturing, you have companies like the bottling companies, Coca-Cola, you have the beer manufacturing companies. These are all opportunities where African countries can set specific targets with these companies, come up with strategic goals around sustainability, and leverage those interactions to raise funds for infrastructure projects. Again, this is something we've seen done very actively in Latin America and hardly at all on the African. I mean, we do have a few examples scattered, but I do think there's an opportunity for even more. And as it relates to financial services, one of the things that I would just emphasize, I think we have some.
We can hear you.
Oh, you can hear me, okay. I heard something else feeding into the sound. When you think about, for example, financial services, a number of countries have a central hub for foreign investors and are able to identify a pathway. So if someone's a foreign investor, a foreign company, they have a central point of contact within the African country. I think that's really critical, and that's an area where there are a lot of opportunities as well. So some companies, foreign investors coming in, they may identify, for example, that there aren't, what's written in terms of the rules are not really the way it works. So what's on the books versus practice are very different. So I think there's an opportunity there for our African countries to really centralize and shorten and quicken the way business is done. As Joanna was saying, the current US administration doesn't believe in red tape, so they're looking as much as possible to cut out the noise, to be clear on the priorities, be clear on the process, where if the priorities are aligned, the president is applying common sense and saying, let's move into action and let's accomplish the business and strategic objectives that are mutually beneficial. So I would say it's very important as African countries that we start to think accordingly, making sure that we are able to make the process smoother across the different sectors.
Excellent. Thank you, Chinwe. So we have 2 questions left. I will take one that was submitted in advance, and I will take one from the audience. Any other questions from the audience? No? You? Yes, sir.
Do the American administration think about...
I'm so sorry. Could you please pass the mic to him? I'm sorry. No, it's fine. It's 2 questions I have left. One for the audience and one. He asked already earlier, that's why. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you. My question is very simple. What is the appetite of U.S. companies to do joint ventures with African companies? Because private sector is the engine of the economy. All the policies, all the the political side is important, yes, but the real private sector is what makes the difference.
Absolutely. Chenwei, would you like to answer that?
So I think the audio cut out. I did not hear the question. Can you repeat the question, please?
Microphone.
I can't hear.
Hello.
Do you hear now?
Can you hear me now?
I can't hear at all.
Okay.
Okay.
I guess I'll answer. Okay.
Can't hear.
Go ahead. No, I'll answer. So I think that again, the private sector wants to do what? Want to make money. That's the essence of companies, to generate revenue, right? So our firm, one of the services that we provide is we bring delegations to the continent, businesses that either want to expand, that either want to work with other companies on the continent to do just that, to explore what opportunities are available. And if there are opportunities to generate revenue, and there will be a return on their investment, I think that companies are open to it. However, I think your question is tied to the last question that I'm going to answer. And this person asked, what are the most effective steps African nations can take to build investor-ready local environments, from financial services to regulatory frameworks that both attract U.S. investments and advance Africa's long-term development goals? Okay. So from an investor's perspective, before they go into the market, there are a number of questions that they ask. And they usually come to our firm and ask us these questions. And we have to do an analysis, do some research to provide them with the most accurate response to their concern. One of them is, this particular country that we're interested in going into, is there political, well, first and foremost, can we make money in this sector, in the country? Once we've identified, yes, you can make money. Secondly, is there stable government in that country, right? And the reason they want to know is, sometimes we see from presidents to presidents, the agreement you may have with this government may no longer be applicable under the other government. So they want to know, is there continuity? Is there political stability in the country before they go in? And they also want to know about the judiciary, right? Because whenever you're engaged in business, litigation will arise. So the question is, if litigation were to arise, will I get a fair hearing in court? They want to know, is it free and is it fair, right? So once we answer those questions, then the company is now ready to go into the country to visit, and we do additional research. So those are important. So it's important that the governments create an enabling environment for foreign investors to come in and do business. And it's also important that, and I think my colleague Chenwei talked about this earlier, that governments also invest in the strategic communications of their nations, right? It's a big world out there with 170 plus countries, right? And people want to know, investors want to know, what is it about your country that is attractive, right? And in particular, when it comes to the business side, oftentimes you have government, you have businesses that are doing very well, but where are the success stories, right? So perhaps the governments, and because I think it's tied to creating that enabling environment, because it's not just from a legislative perspective or from a legal perspective, but it's also from a public relations perspective as well, making sure that there are success stories. Maybe you work with the Chamber of Commerce in your respective country, or you work with the Ministry of Trade, and there is somewhere on the website that highlights a number of success stories from people, came from different parts of the world, and they invest. And I'll tell you this: a lot of the reluctancy that exists when it comes to investing on the African continent comes from perception. We have, at our firm, one of the things that we pride ourselves on is we don't only support businesses, governments, and so on. We also do business on the African continent. Many of us at our firm. In fact, one of the gentlemen, our managing partners, owns a resort in Accra, Ghana. And he will tell you, he would have never been able to to reach that level of financial success in such a short period of time in America, in this particular industry. So the opportunities to make money is there, right? But governments, Chamber of Commerces across the continent, and private sector individuals have an obligation to ensure that the story of your country is being told as a way to attract investors into your country. That is vital to your success. And I'll say one of the reasons why America is such a great nation, besides our military might and so on, when it comes to branding, we're really good at it, right? We're really good at branding the United States. And I think that is something that could be learned from around the world, because oftentimes what you see is governments and corporations, they tend to be more reactive than proactive. You have to be proactive in attracting investors. So even when the investors are not coming, you still need to lay the foundation and create that enabling environment so that they can one day come. So it's vital. Chinwe, before we close, would you like to add to that?
I would just echo everything that you said. The piece around perception, I think that's something that we see time and again, where African governments, for example, or leaders from various sectors visit the US but don't fully leverage the opportunity to tell the stories about the strategic priorities that have been discussed with the US and also some of the accomplishments on the continent. So that continues to be an area where we can, and again, we can't overemphasize it, only because I think for our African countries, because we know those countries so well, we assume that the rest of the world knows as well what's happening outside of Africa. So it's very important to tell the stories.
Thank you, Chinwe. So at this time, I think we might have, we might be able to answer 2 more questions. We have a bit more time left. Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. Mejdi from Algeria, working in the private education sector. You mentioned the...
I'm sorry, you work where?
The private education sector, Plurium.
Okay.
So you mentioned the importance of perception. I was wondering, when we talk about the vision of America and Africa, so Africa would like also to be more prosperous, stronger, safer. So there is an alignment here, yeah? So my question is, have you identified any divergent or misaligned priorities between Africa and America? And what are you doing to address them? I can give you just a concrete example. For example, food security is a top priority for Africa and also the United States. Are there any, as I said, divergent priorities? For example, for Africa, education and training is very important. Yeah, and I believe it hasn't been emphasized enough. So what's your take on that? Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's an excellent question. And I don't think that Chinwe and I are probably the best people to answer this question for you. Obviously, we have our general opinion, right? But in terms of what the U.S. is doing, we've seen some cutbacks in various areas. I think, again, from my personal opinion, we all can agree it's important to have an educated society, right? Education should be a priority. Healthcare should be a priority, right? Those are things that I think most people can agree on. But what you're asking is what the U.S. is doing around that particular area, and that is not one of our areas of focus at the firm. We focus primarily on critical minerals acquisition, debt financing, carbon credits, strategic communications, and several other areas. So the embassy folks who just left, they would have been the best person for you to ask that question. Okay. Thank you so much. Next question, please. Yes, go ahead.
I would like first to thank you for your presentations. I'm Sidali Betata from Algeria Invest, first digital platform dedicated to investment in Algeria. My question is regarding the possibility for African country to adopt the same concept, Africa first, and in their foreign policy. Can we imagine, can we develop trade and businesses with the US in the spirit of win-win spirit? Thank you.
I think we talked about that earlier. Thank you so much for your question. I think we talked about that earlier, right? That's what negotiations are for, right? You don't go into negotiations and for both parties to not win, right? The same principles that apply when it comes to negotiating between two companies apply when it comes to two countries as well. So certainly, a negotiation, a true negotiation, everyone should walk away with having received something from that negotiation. And I gave an example earlier with the DRC deal, right? A critical minerals deal. We see that President Kagame offered, President Tshisekedi offered the U.S. access to its critical minerals in exchange for peace. We know that there's been a conflict in that side of DRC since the Rwandan genocide. So it's been a very ongoing conflict that the President Tshisekedi said, we need peace, and went to the President of the United States and offered critical minerals in exchange for support in order to bring about peace, right? Now, there's a lot of debates about that agreement. We're not there to get into those debates, but that's an example of the President is receiving support in addressing the crisis, and the U.S. is receiving something else. So you can enter. There are opportunities to enter into negotiations where it's a win-win for both parties, but you have to understand the priorities going in. If you go into negotiations with the U.S., you don't know the priorities, you don't understand how whatever it is that you are requesting of the United States has to make a positive impact domestically, you're not going to win, right? So so this administration prioritizes foreign policy that uplifts its people domestically. So domestic politics now is tied into our foreign policy, which in the past, that wasn't always the case. It was the case sometimes, but not always the case. So I hope that answered your question. Thank you. Yes, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. My name is Blessing from Nigeria. I'm looking at some of the policy that can support women into world trade like coffee, where you have a large network across Africa, and how America can collaborate with Africa to support women on how to basically export and also take off from those women that are into basically coffee. I say coffee because coffee is a large consumable and it's from Africa. But a lot of times we have opportunities to move them around the world, but we don't know the financial support or the policy that is attached to Africa and other world. So I don't know the intervention policy that can really support women to trade coffee around the world. I've been into coffee for 14 years now, and trading above Africa is really a difficult term for me. So I don't know if you have anything to say about that. Thank you.
Yeah, I discussed that briefly, I think before you walked in. We talked about the importance of following the markets, right? Understanding U.S. foreign policy shifts, especially in the age of tariffs, right? We saw that recently about 50% tariffs was imposed on Brazil. And Brazil sells a lot of its coffee to the United States. That might be an opportunity for the Nigerian government to strike a deal with the U.S. administration. It's too expensive getting it from Brazil, because at the end of the day, who ends up paying the tariffs? It's the American consumer. If I'm paying $1 for my cup of coffee, and because of the tariffs, I have to pay like $5, that's a problem. Domestically, it's a problem for the administration as well, because remember, their foreign policy is tied to their domestic priorities as well. So that's an opportunity. But however, again, we're private sector, right? The flip side to that is because the reality is that there is so much fluctuation with our policies, and because we have a system where you can negotiate something today, negotiate something tomorrow, so that 50% tariffs may be lifted. The president of Brazil may travel to the US and say, Mr. President, this is what I'm going to give you, and tomorrow you hear an announcement that it has been reduced to 10%, and you have this ship of coffee from Nigeria coming to the US, and now the market is not big enough for your coffee. So I was talking to a colleague of mine yesterday, actually. I have very smart friends, and I call on them before I do these types of presentations. So he was telling me a way to address this gap, right, would be perhaps an institution like Afri-Exim Bank or AFDB can provide insurance cover against adverse U.S. changes in policy. So while your coffee is en route to the U.S., tariffs has been decreased from 50% to, let's say, 5 or 10%, which will have a direct impact on your business. Perhaps institutions like AFDB or Afri-Exim could provide some kind of insurance so that you won't lose money, ultimately. So that's one approach, right? But it requires that you lobby these institutions, you work with your government to ensure that these systems are in place. But I really think it's important that you do follow the market and see what's happening. Chinwe, would you like to add to that?
I think just to underscore what you shared about the bilateral relationships between the country and the U.S., and then the second thing is leveraging chambers of commerce within the countries, and also building relationships across borders with professionals who are in the U.S. as well. I will just add and underscore what you were saying, which in the case of the coffee example, when someone is entering a negotiation with the U.S., understanding the cost challenges of the U.S. consumer, it is going to be great to be able to frame it that way and say, hey, this would help the government reduce costs to the U.S. consumer. And again, that could be a great selling point as well for the administration and for the American people, because no one likes to pay high prices. So that's just a simple example of understanding where the opportunity is in the market, understanding the mutual benefits. So obviously for the African or the Nigerian manufacturing, the companies, it's having access to broader markets. Because one of the things that is pretty evident is the US has one of the largest consumer markets in the world. So everyone wants access to the US consumer. And so that's one point of benefit for the company. But then when you're able to then highlight that the benefit to the US and how it makes America better is that it's cheaper for Americans and it gives Americans more variety and more options. That's, again, a way to frame it. So I think, yeah, the coffee example is tangible. And we can also speak as well offline as needed if we can support with specific questions that are coming up with the industry.
Thank you, Chinwe. Yes. Consider this to be a class. We are learning, and I'm actually learning from your questions. It's giving me ideas on what we should, on some of the things that we should focus on as a firm, additional areas we should consider. So thank you for your contribution to this. Go ahead.
Thank you for your presentation. And my name is Mohammed Fakhruddin from Egypt, and I come from a private company specializing in building materials. So my perspective is a bit...
So that was the side event on Africa-US relations, looking at how shifting policies can really be transformed into new, impactful opportunities for the continent. Conversations there underscored the need for innovation, stronger partnerships, and AFCFTA-driven growth. And you have been watching Newsday with me all afternoon, Aniez El Sakwe. Goodbye, and thank you so much for watching.